Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Butcher. I'm from London and England and Britain. Don't hold it against me, okay? I come in peace. How many people is here? Put your hand up if you're working in or associated with what you would call deep tech, so the mix of science and technology. Put it high, come on, be proud. Okay, we've got a few good representatives. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to try and have a little bit of fun with this because obviously one of the big, huge, advantages we have in Europe is we still believe in science, everybody, and facts and truth. And we do not believe in disinformation. We do not believe in that shit. And we're here to talk about the scientific method, and that's where deep tech is coming from. And we are super strong. So every time you see deep tech in the US, there's usually a European involved, everybody, let's face it.
Yeah.
There's, oh my God, deep tech is so strong in the US? Yeah, that's because you got a German doing it. You hired a German, or a Brit, or a French person, whoever. Anyway, so we've got fantastic people. Now, Marvel, let's hear a little bit about what these people are doing. Marvel Fusion, tell us what it is.
So at Marvel Fusion, we are working on commercializing fusion energy being the opposite of fission, so we're not tearing atoms apart, but fusing them together. It's a CO2-free, safe, and reliable energy source, so exactly what we would need here in Europe, and especially in Germany, to have competitive energy prices, energy sovereignty, and basis for our industrial base that we have here.
And when is it coming on stream? Next week?
So as I don't want you to only believe in my nice blue eyes, I'm going to give you some objective data. So there has been a recent survey by the Fusion Industry Association where 70% of the companies globally believe we will have fusion power plants on the grid by 2035. And I would say 70% by 2035, that's good for the planet.
That's pretty fast, reasonably fast. It could be faster, but keep going. Let's have a bit.
Yeah, trying our very best.
Do your best. Now, there's some wonderful stats I want to give you guys quickly. Funding going into deep tech has hovered around 20% over the past decade and shot up above 30% in the past 2 years. But Europe still lags behind the US when it comes to investment. This year, 2024. US deep tech firms raised $52 billion compared to just $14 billion in Europe and $13 billion in Asia. So we are $1 billion fast ahead of Asia and several $billion behind the US. You're running an initiative called EU Inc. And EU Inc. is about creating a kind of like a Delaware company for Europe. Tell us more.
Yeah, so exactly. So what's happening right now is Europe is really exporting its future. Every year, we lose 6% of our founders towards the US to Delaware Inc. They take 20%, almost 20% of value each year away from the European ecosystem. This is because deep tech is not built in garage anymore. Deep tech is built in networks. Deep tech is built on ecosystems. And Europe doesn't have an ecosystem. Europe is in fact 27 different ecosystems and I think 40 different legal entities. That means we don't have capital mobility, so we can't raise capital outside of a European country, or like only 18% of funding rounds, early stage funding rounds, cross borders in Europe. That means if you do not have the best investor right next door, you likely get the second best investor or non-investor at all. And that's hindering our momentum in Europe. So what we are doing is kind of like a deep institutional innovation. We created a grassroots movement with 13,000 founders, 600 VCs, lobbying on EU level for the creation of a new pan-European entity. Streamlined, digital first, acceptable for founders, no headache anymore, and operatable from day one across whole of Europe. Because we believe that's the way to unify the European ecosystem and actually unleash, therefore, all our momentum on scale.
Who thinks this is a good idea? So, and that's when you're going to be doing that next week, yeah?
Yes, so we are doing this.
Executing it?
We're doing this since October. We launched in October, and back then everybody told us 7 years until the commission listened. We managed this in 4 weeks, so we tried to keep the pace up. We are now in direct condition.
You did a petition,
Yes.
didn't you? And how many people entrepreneurs signed the petition?
We have 13,000 entrepreneurs signed it. 13.
13,000.
13,000. Yeah, that's actually the biggest startup competition or petition that ever happened globally.
And what did the EU Commission say when you started this initiative?
They published an internal memo about us because I never saw something like this before, that founders suddenly care about institutional competitiveness. But they started listening, so we're in direct contact with them. Afterwards, we deployed like a paper, or we created an industry blueprint with the best tier 1 law firms and with 1,000 founders and all the associations together, how the perfect entity has to look like for Europe. Because we believe the entity is the foundation to make Europe home actually for the best founders in the world. So that they are not leaving Europe, but coming back to Europe. Because Europe is really attractive. We have R&D, we have diverse systems, we have wonderful food and different culture. But we need a unified ecosystem for founders.
Now, obviously Marvel Fusion is building out a facility in the US, but also a lot of your researchers, I think, are based here in Germany. Do these kinds of initiatives like move the needle for you in terms of like EU stuff? Or, I mean, you know, you've raised a lot of money based on just what you're doing. Do you support this kind of thing?
I definitely support these kind of initiatives, so to unite Europe and have this as a unified market. But I also want to share some more numbers on like the funding figures that you had earlier. So if I look in the fusion industry, globally there have been more than 6 billion of private capital that have been invested in private company, and less than 2% here in the EU, in EU-based companies, and less than 2%, that cannot be our fair share in Europe, right? We have the smartest scientists, the greatest engineers, and so on here, and then we get less than 2% of funding. And I think that really comes back to the figures that we've also just seen before in the talk, that massive funding gap that we have in Europe. And from my experience, that is really in the growth capital area, right? Funds are too small that we have here in Europe, so we need bigger funds here in Europe that can really also, because in deep tech, you need like the 100 million plus rounds at some point, because you need to build physical infrastructure, right? You can't do everything just by software. You need to do physical infrastructure. So you need 100 million plus rounds at some point. We don't have the size of funds here, but we also don't have the government support here. So what I see in the US is state coming in as anchor customer early on. What I see in the US is milestone-based funding programs, so like supporting companies as they reach milestones with cashback programs and so on, which is super attractive for also private investors. And then I see planning security in the US. So I think that uncertainty that we always have in Europe is really hindering innovation. And planning security, to make that very concrete, in the US, they already have regulated or have issued a regulatory framework for fusion, saying that they're not going to regulate fusion like fission, but like industrial application. And that is planning security that those companies have and that investors have, and that we don't have in Europe right now.
Are you saying Europe is, what's the insecurity in Europe about planning regulation?
Oh, right now, I don't know what my regulatory framework would be in Germany if I'm going to build a power plant. And that planning security I have in the US, and it's like, it's super innovation friendly.
Why do you think that is? What's the reason?
Because whenever we talk on a politics level right now, they say, oh, we don't need the regulation yet because you're not building a power plant yet. But I'm saying that's not, like, I need to have like that framework to know like which regulation I'm going to build it under. Otherwise, because I need to start planning my power plants now. And if we talk about like global scale and rollout of power plants, we want to have like harmonized regulatory frameworks globally in the best case. Like I can't develop one power plant as to US standards and one to Japanese standards and one to South African standards, right? I need to have a harmonized framework.
Surely there's an international body, Global Atomic Energy Association, I think, whatever it's called. Surely they have some standards that you can work to, no?
So currently it's only the US and the UK that have issued standards.
Just the US and the UK?
Yeah. And that is where currently we see the biggest activity, and Commonwealth Fusion has just announced that they are going to build their first-of-a-kind power plant in the US, and they looked at every site globally, and they decided to go to the US.
So in other words, you're saying there's a big problem in Europe that we're not doing any kind of planning about this, even though we keep talking about, you know, deep tech and fusion and, you know, the planet and green technologies. Nobody's actually regulated?
I think one thing is like that, and the other thing is also like clear commitment from the government, right? We have seen in the US, they have issued the bold decadal vision. They want to have power plants on the grid in 10 years from now. That has, it's like, it has been like a big event, White House, Capitol Hill, and all of that, right? I haven't seen fusion in Ursula von der Leyen's statement that she gave, like when she started the new period that we have on a European level. The German government wanted to issue a fusion strategy. Now our government is going to be replaced, so they didn't manage to do that anymore. So I haven't seen a real clear commitment from Europe or Germany that they want to have fusion energy.
Any politicians in the room? I think you might be hearing from... Yeah. Steffi, when are you running for Prime Minister, by the way? Yeah, you take Germany, I'll do the UK.
UK, by the way, the UK has a regulatory framework besides
the UK.
So they have done a leading job here in Europe.
Last question, no, obviously we want to talk to you. What will this change under Trump?
So I don't expect that Trump will foster CO2-free, sustainable technologies, but what I do see is that fusion energy, being able to power data centers, is something where we have seen a lot of effort going into that, because the data centers will obviously need a lot of energy going forward, and fusion energy can power that. I have seen that now that China is really doubling down their fusion efforts. China has outspent the US in the past year by factor 2 in their public funding. So everything I see right now is that under Trump, fusion will also remain their funding levels, or even increase their funding levels.
He doesn't like turbines. Maybe he likes nuclear fusion. What about the European Innovation Council? You know, they put 1.4 billion into deep tech. Do you find that there's a little bit too much meddling going on, you know, doing these investments? They should just leave it to the private sector?
I mean, I do believe ambition is quite impatient. And I do believe the founders today, deep tech founders especially, they struggle getting momentum very early on. And if they're getting momentum, they don't get far. I think the European Innovation Council is an important instrument, but it's not, from my point of view, a serious instrument to accelerate these founders towards their goals. Because imagine you want to spin out like an IP from your university. You started, you have the idea, you have the momentum, then you are like 12 months negotiating with your university about the IP. Afterwards, you apply to EIC programs, you wait another 12 months to get like approval of the funds. And then you get maybe 1-2 million euros after 24 months. In that time, like in the US, somebody has built and tested 2 different companies. And I think what we need is really fast money, really fast incorporation and standards that enable you planability, not on the growth capital level from my point of view, because I'm coming from the bottom up. I'm talking about early stage, inception stage. How do we accelerate? How do we increase the shots on the goal from deep tech founders? And for that, I'm skeptical that we should rely on this instrument. Private funds are exceptionally well suited in venture capital. We have seen that in the US. They have created 8 out of 10 most valuable companies today. We lost that bet. We should be really careful losing the next bet as well. And all public funds usually, or public funds in an innovation area do not perform on the same level as private capital.
I'm glad you mentioned the university angle, because one of the often big criticisms of universities in Europe is that they take too much equity in early stage of spin-outs out of the university. And obviously you're relying on a lot of deep tech from our university institutions. Do you both agree that that's the case, that it can be improved? What model would you like to see in terms of R&D coming out of our institutions?
So, first of all, R&D, I think the public spending is relatively high in Europe. It's not too efficient compared to the US. Private R&D spending is significantly lower, and I think we're going to see a further deceleration because automotive is not as bright as years ahead, unfortunately. In the last 3 decades, private R&D spending was mainly automotive, as you see in the Draghi report, versus in the US, it was invested in computer and data and health, etc. And what I once again think about the R&D or like the spin-off from universities, I think it's fair that a university needs ownership in the IP they developed. And what is the amount? I don't want to judge that, but what we have to do is like create a standard, like the Sprint does right now. I think with IP 3.0, I think they have an attempt on that right now and building a prototype. We need a standard that you can plug and play within a week or within 2 weeks, and not like that you suddenly have to find the stakeholders, go to obscure systems, understand or like have like some artificial conversation about like castles in the sky, how much this company is worth, because the company will not be nothing if you don't get the acceleration in the beginning.
Yeah. How about yourself?
I fully agree to what Philipp said. I think it has to be fast, it has to be pragmatic. You don't want to spend 3 years of experts assessment of like what's the right share. It has to be unified across Europe if possible. And I think that would be my 2 cents on that.
One of the themes that I've picked up on at DLD this year is the idea of defense technology and dual-use technology for obvious reasons. We're at war with Russia, basically. I'm just going to say it out loud. We're at war with Russia, and we have to win this war. We have to help Ukraine. Yes, you can clap.
No problem.
As we've seen, we're now in a phase of this period where deep technology is incredibly important to this war. You're seeing the roboticization of warfare with drone technology, both aerial drone, ground drone. It's like science fiction, basically. It's all happening right now. But this investment into deep tech, and now Klaus Hummels did a fantastic speech a couple of days ago saying that if we put 10 billion euros into defense technology, in 10 years' time, we'd have 250 billion euros. That would translate into that. So it's very crucial and it's very important. This concept of doing dual-use funding, so obviously there's fusion, there's research in this area that's both defense and civilian related. How important is that, and do you want to see more of it? What's your view?
So you could argue that one of the biggest milestones we have seen in fusion was an experiment done at the National Ignition Facility in California that demonstrated net energy gain for the first time 2 years ago. And that facility is a multi-billion-dollar facility, and that is dual use. It's both for weapons research and for fusion. And they have a budget of more than 400 million per year. And you could argue that even in the US, you would have never built this multi-billion-dollar infrastructure only for the use case of fusion. So I think wherever we can leverage joint infrastructure, wherever it can help to leverage funds and so on, it makes a lot of sense. And I would also go as far as saying that like having this strict distinction between civil application and defense application definitely hindered innovation in the past, and that we shouldn't be as strict going forward here in Europe.
Yeah, 100% agree. What we see right now at inception stage, early stage, we see suddenly, also in Ukraine, this is a war fought by hackers. You have suddenly hackers building drones, they're writing the software alone on their own computers. It's not like very complex development processes often. And in Europe, we have everywhere in Europe suddenly defense hackathons, young engineers, 20 years old, younger, that build and try to find solutions literally for the battlefield. And now this artificial or like traditional differentiation between civil use and defense or dual use, that will slow them down as well. So I agree, we should really rethink our definition there.
And finally, the last sort of 30 seconds, how do we unlock more capital for deep tech in Europe? We're still behind the US, we're only just ahead of Asia. What would be the magic bullet for you, starting with you?
We need one entity in Europe. We need one standardized investment instrument that can compete with like the SAFE. The entity has to compete with Delaware Inc. The biggest export product of the US is not a cheeseburger, it's not crude oil, it's Delaware Inc. Each year attracting headquarters, each year attracting talent, the best talent in the world going to the US. They move their headquarters there, they move their taxes there, we lose the jobs. So what we have to do is like creating this entity. And then the money will follow, the money will come, because we have great talent.
So the EU Inc. is the magic bullet for you. What about
Absolutely.
you?
So if we talk about the funding gap that we talked about earlier, we need bigger funds in Europe. For that, we need to, I think the WIN initiative that we have seen here in Germany, leveraging pension funds to go more into venture capital, is a good first step. What we need, that needs to massively increase. So we need bigger funds. We need milestone-based funding programs. We need a new role of the state, so the state going in as an anchor customer early on, not only for the finalized product, but also for prototypes, for development phases, and so on. And then we need planning security. And I think if we leverage those, then that funding gap would be closed. And I think the other thing we didn't talk that much about, but I think you had it in your presentation as well, is partnerships. I think here in Europe, we still think about there's startups, there's industrials, there is academia, and we need to combine those way more. As you mentioned earlier, we are building our facility in the US, a $150 million facility in a public-private partnership with a university. That's unthinkable of here in Europe. And those are the projects that we need in Europe as well. And then, maybe to end on a positive note, we still have everything here in our hands, right? We have the best engineers, we have a great industrial base, and the next deep tech champions can be made in Germany, can be made in Europe, but if we don't tackle those problems, they won't be.
Well, there you go. And I'm very delighted to say that we'll have a politician shortly who'll be fixing all of these problems very quickly. And but ladies and gentlemen, for now, thank you so much. Give it up for the panel and see you later.